Hello learners, welcome to the course Migrated Women's Literature. Today's lecture is the second part of Zoroastrian Diaspora and overview of Zoroastrianism. While talking about the history of Zoroastrianism, it becomes necessary to talk about the history of the Vedic Aryan immigrants of India. Racially, Zoroaster was of the Indo-European stock, which was believed to have been divided into two sections in about 2000 BC. The first section had settled in Europe and the other one was again divided into two. The historians called this further divided group Shate. This word is derived from Sanskrit word shatam, which means 100. Of these eastbound Aryans, one group settled in the land known as India and the other settled in the land now called Iran. The coming of Zoroastrians to India is marked after the Arab rule in Iran in 651 AD. Earlier to that, the Zoroastrians had spread throughout Persia. The Achaemenian or Hakamonetian emperors who ruled from 550 BC to 330 BC, were ardent Zoroastrians. This empire, founded by Cyrus or Kurush the Great, had its capital at Persepolis. The empire stretched from Danube to Indus during its halcyon days. The leading emperors were Kambashta, Darius, or who was also known as Daryavayush, Xerxes, etc. There had been a rock which is called Naksh-e-Rustam in Iran, engraved at the orders of Darius, who is considered to be the last ruler of this line. And when we read that rock, it translates as I, Darius, the great king of kings, a Parsi, the son of a Parsi, and Aryan of Aryan family. So these engraved lines are quite similar to Sanskrit language. King Darius was defeated in 330 BC, but after a brief spell of Macedonian rule, the Parthians again took over Iran. They were the natives of Iran and were also the believers of Zarathustra. But due to Greek intervention, the early Parthians were culturally Hellenized. Although in late Parthian times a nationalist revival was seen, then the Sasanians followed them, who ruled Iran from 211 AD to 641 AD. They aggressively promoted the Zurvanite form of Zoroastrianism. When the Sassanids captured the territory from the Romans, they often built temples to promote their religion. However, before the 6th century, Zoroastrianism had spread to northern China via Silk Route and had gained official status in a number of Chinese states. By the 13th century, the religion had faded from China. In the early 7th century, Sasanic dynasty was overthrown by the Arab rulers. The Arabs defeated them at the Battle of Qadisiyah, which is also known as Qudusiyah. And they captured the Sasanian capital, and the Arabs treated Zoroastrians as the people of the book, which is called in Arabic Ahli Kitab, and allowed them to practice their religion. According to Islamic law, the communities following other religions were never forced to conversion. If they are the people of the book, then they are even freer to observe their own rituals and religions. Those communities which have been benefited and blessed with some or the other prophet are considered as people of the book. And Zoroastrians are one of those communities. Due to the willing conversion of Parsi men, their priests decided to leave the country and they migrated from there. Many Zoroastrians fled from there. Among them, several groups had migrated to the western shores of the Indian subcontinent. They landed at Diu in Gujarat. The exact dates of their landing are not known, and 756 or 936 CE had been suggested by different schools of historians. The time when these Zoroastrians reached India, when they landed at Diu in Gujarat, there is this story which is associated with their landing. It is called the story of sugar and milk. When they arrived in India, the Parsi Dastur is a word which is used for the high priest in Zoroastrianism. So the Parsi Dastur sent his messenger to the ruling king Jadav Rana, and he sought permission for entering the state. But the king sent a glass full of milk with that messenger to the Dastur. Dastur, who was a very intelligent man, he interpreted the message. The message meant our land is already overpopulated. There is no place for new people. Dastur mixed a spoonful of sugar in that glass of milk, intending that we will live peacefully without harming the harmony and peace of the state. So, this is how these Parsis got refuge here in India many years ago. But at the time of coming to India, there were certain conditions that were imposed on them. The Zoroastrians who landed at Diu had to accept those conditions. The very first condition was that the king said the Parsi priest would explain their religion to the king. The second condition was that all these Parsis would leave their Persian language and accept the language of that place, which was Gujarati. Third condition was the Parsi women would have to exchange their Persian robes for Indian costumes. Fourth condition, which said that all the Parsis would have to drop their weapons. They were not allowed to keep any of the weapons with them. Next condition was to hold all those celebrations, all their wedding processions only in the dark. They were not allowed to have any kind of celebration during the daytime. Last condition was they were not allowed to make any kind of conversion. An eminent Parsi critic, Nilufar Bharucha, she writes about the acceptance of these conditions in her book. I quote, "The unequal conditions provided fertile breeding ground for feelings of ambivalence and alienation from the host country. This ambivalence and alienation became exacerbated during the colonial period, when the Parsis were among the first to embrace English language education and become the most westernized Indian community. Most Parsis thus felt bereft at the end of the empire and at the resultant loss of the special elite status they had enjoyed during the colonial period. Several migrated to the west in the 1950s and 60s. The acceptance of all those conditions resulted in the loss of identity, in the loss of language, and the loss of religious freedom. These conditions were laid down to keep the mainstream Indians away from this new community and from switching their religions. The ruling king, sensing the alarm of losing their religious superiority, had asked them, do not permit any kind of convergence. This is the main reasons why Parsis do not allow convergence till now. Monotheists, unconstrained by any caste system and lighter skinned than the majority of Indians. The Parsis were eminently acceptable by the British Empire. They gained much prominence during the British imperialism. Their economic, educational, social, cultural, political status was enhanced as they outlined noticeable contacts with the British and adopted aspects of Western culture. The colonial period and Western influences added new layers of identity to this small but adaptive community. At the time of freedom struggle, most of the Parsis were against that. However, we still have some very prominent names who contributed to the freedom fight and supported the freedom struggle. We have names like Dadabhai Nauroji, we have names like Firoz Shah Mehta, Bikaji Kama, etc. The result of the colonization was a kind of official slave. At the time, the Indian peasants were transported to the Caribbean and Fiji Islands to fill the gaping holes in the workforce on sugar plantations there. These slaves were taken to those islands with a promise to be set free after some time. But very few of them found the passage back home, as Naipaul has written in his book. For most Indians, the journey to Trinidad had been final. This forced diaspora was later followed by voluntary migration by small entrepreneurs who went there in search of business and trade. Then, from post colonial India in 1950s and 60s, there had been a constant move towards the West. This migration was in search of job as well as for higher studies. This was the time when the Parsis also started migrating from India to the West. The Zoroastrians that started migrating after the colonial era, they are still there in different nations and they have also experienced so many changes as immigrants do. The Zoroastrians of USA, the Zoroastrians of Canada, Australia are experiencing so many dynamic changes regarding their religious beliefs. These communities largely took shape in the post 1965. Yet there are younger British Parsis who are still anxious to preserve their traditions. In those Western nations, Parsis have built their small communities. They have built their small localities where they live jointly and they feel strengthened. Being a minority community, the Parsis too had been facing several problems, ignorance, and alienation, which have accelerated their migration towards the West. The Zoroastrians faced double migration. First, they migrated from Persia to India. Second, from India to different Western countries. Currently, the educated Parsis prefer to start their career in the West. This era of migration is still going on, which had started after the end of colonial rule. If we talk about the Parsis as achievers, we see that there is a great sense of pride in their accomplishments, perhaps more than ever after the first euphoria of independence. Our diaspora writers have made India proud by carrying its glorious memories abroad and bringing them back. Most of their works are still centered in India. They all have Indian themes. Living as diaspora means living in forced or voluntary exile that leads to severe identity crisis and a sense of alienation from the old as well as from the new cultures and homelands. Though alienated from the Indian society, yet Parsis progressed in the fields of business and industry, and undoubtedly they had gained this success and progress single handedly. Their contribution in the field of literature is also remarkable. The wide exposure which Parsis availed in and outside India has facilitated them to generate a considerable body of literary works. The literature by the Zoroastrians can be divided into two sections: the pre independence literature and the post independence literature. The first section comprises the works composed before 1950. During that time, the impact of British had prevailed among the Parsis. They preferred to be known as the second white race. Consequently, by the turn of the century, a new Anglophile generation of Parsis emerged, which was English in spirit, manners, and morals. The first clan of Parsi writers in English belongs to this section. The next phase of Parsi writers belongs to the post independence era. Here, the writings are mainly concerned with the identity crisis and a quest for stronger roots. After the end of British rule, they had to face many tormentations, and their literature reflected it all. This post independence era of literature found expression in all forms of literature, like poetry, drama, and novels. All reflect their country and their community. The concerns of the age and the problems faced by the Parsis, mainly the middle class Parsis, are also presented in their literature. Many Parsi poets like Keki and Daruwala, Kai Patel, etc., have expressed same feelings in their writings. The poetry by these poets progressed a lot and carved a remarkable place for itself. Though the era for Parsi drama did not make any distinguished appearance. The last to emerge is Parsi novels. It came as a rage and made quick progress in terms of both quality and quantity. The Parsi fiction reached fruition between the decades of 1970 to 90. Their central concern is identity formation. Many Parsi authors have created swells in Indian as well as world English literature. They are preoccupied with the troubles rooted by partition, problems of identity, and tribulations of marginalization, and most importantly, the problems of their dwindling population. Again, the post independence era novelists can further be divided into two: stay at home writers and the expatriate writers. The stay at home authors, as it suggests, preferred to leave their motherland and write about the different issues of the country. Some of the renowned writers of this section are Dina Mehta, Meher Pestonji, and V.K. Karanjia. The expatriate writers, though not living in their homeland, yet they talk about their native place. The problems of the native place, the life of the people there in their motherland, and all the complexities faced by those people have all been expressed and presented in their writings. To name a few expatriate writers, Rohinton Misri, Bapsi Sidhwa, Farrukh Dhondi, Firdaus Kanga, Ardashir Vakil, Homan Desai, and Sora Homi Francis Irani are there. These diaspora Parsi writers have presented Parsi ethos in their writings. They have talked about their motherland, they have talked about their community, and they have presented all the issues and concerns of Parsi community specifically in their writings. We find that there is one similar line of themes that is taken by these Parsi expatriate writers. And some of these themes talk about the problems of the community, the alienation that the community had experienced, the issue of interfaith marriages, and the clash between two generations. Their writings also talk about the impacts of diaspora on the people. In the lectures to come, we would take up one such diasporic female Zoroastrian writer, and we would discuss a novel written by her. The Parsi community has a long tradition in public life in India. Wherever its members have settled, they endeavored to carry their tradition. This is typical of the Parsi tendency to adapt but without surrendering their distinctiveness. That's all for today. Thank you.